What if the prince who walked away from the palace is the same man who just blew the royal narrative wide open? On a grey London morning, as the rain slicked the runway at Heathrow, a private jet touched down without fanfare. There were no royal guards waiting, no red carpet, just a blur of black SUVs and silent drivers in dark suits. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And stepping out, unrecognizable to some in his hoodie and stubble, was Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, returning not for duty, but with documents in hand. Evidence, he would later claim, that reveals a side of Meghan Markle the public has never seen. Not the humanitarian, not the mother, not the American actress who married into the monarchy, but something else entirely. Someone who, behind closed doors, had allegedly weaponized her access to money, power, and royal connections for personal gain. And this time, Harry wasn't protecting her. It's the kind of betrayal that shakes institutions, not just because of who it involves, but because of what it reveals. At the heart of this scandal are allegations of financial manipulation involving a royal-adjacent charity, Crownkind UK, once praised for its mission to uplift marginalized communities. According to leaked documents, Meghan Markle allegedly used her position on the board to redirect funds, money earmarked for community projects, towards personal luxury purchases, undisclosed investments, and private ventures. Contracts, payments, and confidential emails, now in the hands of UK financial authorities, draw a damning trail of inconsistencies, unexplained withdrawals, and shell corporations. And the person who handed them over? Prince Harry. Why would he do that? What pushed him to break the unspoken vow of silence that's governed royal scandals for centuries? And what exactly did he find? This isn't gossip. This isn't hearsay. This is about numbers, signatures, receipts, and patterns that don't add up. This is about a man who may have realized too late what it cost to turn his back on tradition, and who he turned his back on it for. But let's pause and ask, why now? For years, Harry and Meghan presented a united front. From their bombshell Oprah interview to their billion-dollar media deals, they sold the story of exile. Two lovers who left behind privilege for freedom, speaking truth to power, exposing the alleged toxicity of royal life. But as time went on, cracks started to show. The Spotify fallout, the mixed critical reception of their Netflix docuseries, silent business partners, canceled deals, and behind the scenes, reports of tension, erratic behavior, and legal maneuverings began to emerge. Now, with Meghan facing direct scrutiny from UK financial investigators, and potentially facing criminal charges, everything has changed. What you're about to hear goes beyond a personal feud or celebrity scandal. This is a story of corruption, betrayal, and accountability. And the person sounding the alarm isn't an outside journalist or a disgruntled employee. It's the man who once vowed to protect her at all costs. This is a story that spans continents, from Silicon Valley to Kensington Palace. It's about influence, image, and the cost of silence. It's about the moment the truth becomes too heavy to carry. And it starts right here with Harry's return to London. The tip-off to British authorities reportedly came through an anonymous channel. But the details were too specific, too sharp. Investigators quickly identified the source. What they found was a cache of internal documents, some bearing Meghan's signature. Others traced back to offshore accounts connected to business entities in Delaware, Monaco, and the Caymans. Dozens of flagged transactions revealed a pattern. Money entering Crownkind as donations or grants, then quietly rerouted. The numbers weren't just suspicious. They were surgical. Private jets to undisclosed locations. Designer renovations on properties shielded behind shell companies. Payments marked as consulting fees to individuals later found to be acting as proxies. There were no dramatic smoking guns, no handwritten confessions. Just spreadsheets, emails, and banking trails that, when viewed together, told a story the public was never meant to see. Somewhere along the line, according to sources close to the investigation, Harry saw those documents too. And something changed. Inside their Montecito home, tensions reportedly grew. Staff turnover increased. Meghan was said to be on edge. Harry withdrawn. According to a former associate, Harry began asking questions about the charity's accounting after an unusually large wire transfer triggered inquiries from a US-based donor. At first, the answers were vague, then evasive, then defensive, and that's when the paper trail began to emerge. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system, and Harry, having grown up in the royal ecosystem, where every coin is audited and every public-facing charity must maintain trust, knew exactly what this kind of evidence meant. This wasn't a tabloid rumor or PR misstep. This was a potential felony. The question now is, why expose it? There are theories. One says Harry felt morally obligated to do the right thing, especially with Crownkind having connections to his late mother's philanthropic legacy. Another claims the couple had long been drifting apart, and this discovery gave Harry the leverage he needed to legally disentangle himself from their shared empire. A third, more cynical view suggests it was damage control, that Harry knew the investigation was inevitable and decided to get ahead of it by cooperating first. Whatever the motive, the result is undeniable. Meghan Markle is now under investigation for potential financial misconduct involving a UK-registered charity. And the man who lit the fuse? Her own husband. It's worth noting that Meghan has not been charged with any crime at the time of this video's production. Her legal team has declined to comment, other than to call the allegations deeply misleading and politically motivated. But authorities aren't backing down, nor is the press. This isn't going away quietly. So what's next? As this expose unfolds, we'll show you exactly what's inside those documents. You'll hear from experts in nonprofit finance, former royal aides, and legal analysts breaking down the potential charges Meghan could face. We'll examine how this impacts the royal family, the public trust in royal-adjacent charities, and the future of the Sussex brand. And you'll get the full story, from betrayal to backlash, from fame to fallout. Because once the curtain is pulled back, nothing looks the same. And whether you admire her or question her, one thing is clear. Meghan Markle is no longer just a duchess. She's now the focus of a financial investigation that could change everything. And Prince Harry? He's no longer just the spare. He's the whistleblower. To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to rewind, not to their wedding day, not to the Oprah interview, but to the first time Prince Harry questioned the foundation he had helped build with Meghan. Sources close to their inner circle say it started subtly. A phone call from an old colleague at a UK nonprofit. A concern raised about missing funds from a joint project that was meant to serve underprivileged youth in East London. Nothing definitive, just whispers. But for someone raised inside the royal machine, Harry had heard enough whispers to know when to dig deeper. He asked for receipts. The answers were vague. He asked again. This time, he was told to let the lawyers handle it. But Harry wasn't just a figurehead. Despite the media portrayal of a man led by his wife's ambition, he had always maintained a quiet involvement in the operations of their foundation work, particularly anything tied to the legacy of Princess Diana. When numbers didn't line up, when money vanished without a trail, his instincts kicked in. And what he found changed everything. Documents were hidden in plain sight. Transaction records with vague descriptions like development fees, consultant retainer, or venue acquisition. Cross-referenced with emails and digital contracts, they formed a pattern. The same third-party shell company, one that had no real business address, kept reappearing in payment flows. Registered under a series of nondescript names, it eventually linked back to an entity Meghan had quietly formed post-Megxit, allegedly for investment purposes. This wasn't just a case of poor bookkeeping. It looked like obfuscation. One former financial advisor, who asked to remain anonymous for legal reasons, described it as a carefully constructed laundering mechanism wrapped in the optics of philanthropy. That advisor, once part of Archwell's back-end operations, had quietly left the team after raising red flags internally. He claims those warnings were brushed aside. And now, those warnings are evidence. When Harry confronted Meghan with the findings, multiple sources suggest it didn't go well. There wasn't a confession. There was fury. There was denial. And above all, there was fear, not of guilt but of exposure. For Meghan, reputation had always been the currency of power. From Hollywood to royalty to global brand deals, Her ascent had been driven by an unrelenting focus on image. That image was her shield, her weapon, and her product. And now it was cracking. Harry's decision to bring the documents to UK authorities was, reportedly, made alone. He didn't consult royal family lawyers. He didn't warn his brother. He simply acted. Some speculate this was a strategic move to protect himself before the House of Cards collapsed. Others believe it was an act of penance. The moment he could no longer protect the woman he loved without betraying the principles he was raised to uphold. Whatever his motive, it set off a chain reaction. Within weeks, Crown Kind UK was served with an inquiry notice by the UK Charity Commission. Financial crimes units across multiple jurisdictions were quietly alerted. Meghan was asked to provide documents. She complied at first, but as the scope widened, her legal team moved into defense mode. Meghan, for her part, maintains innocence. In a brief statement through her lawyers, she claimed complete transparency in her dealings with Crown Kind, asserting that any irregularities stemmed from accounting discrepancies and not intentional wrongdoing. She described herself as a victim of political attacks and emphasized her commitment to supporting communities worldwide. But behind closed doors, authorities weren't buying it. Investigators discovered that more than £9.2 million in donations from 3 international donors had been rerouted in under 18 months. Only a fraction of that money made it to actual projects. The rest, lost in a labyrinth of subcontracts, private holding accounts, and international entities, all suspiciously interconnected. And the deeper they looked, the more names surfaced. Consultants who couldn't be located, contractors with no paper trail, projects that existed only on PowerPoint presentations. It wasn't fraud in the traditional sense, it was sleight of hand on a corporate scale. This isn't just a royal scandal. It's a criminal investigation. As the legal process inches forward, the implications are enormous. For Harry, it's a crossroads. Will his cooperation shield him from fallout, or make him the scapegoat for a system he enabled? For Meghan, it's a reckoning. Her global influence, brand credibility, and public trust now hang in the balance. Her carefully managed image, rooted in empowerment, equity, and transformation, is now under forensic audit. And for the royal family, it's both a vindication and a crisis. On one hand, those who warned about the risks of Meghan's integration into royal life now feel justified. On the other, this scandal threatens the reputation of every royal-affiliated charity operating today. Trust, once broken in this ecosystem, is hard to rebuild. As we move into the heart of this story, ask yourself this. If you discovered the person you loved, the person you built a life with, was hiding something like this, would you stay silent? Would you walk away? Or would you speak out, knowing the cost? Prince Harry made his choice, and now the world is watching. London doesn't wait for drama. The city moves whether royalty rises or falls. But on the morning Prince Harry returned, unannounced, uninvited, and unmistakably alone, London paused. The news broke quietly at first. A blurry photo on a Twitter account with a history of accurate celebrity tips. A man in a black hoodie and cargo jacket stepping out of Heathrow's private terminal. The caption read simply, "Is this Harry?" Within minutes, the image was everywhere. By noon, British tabloids were scrambling. Royal watchers flooded timelines with speculation. Was it a reconciliation trip? A funeral? A court appearance? Kensington and Buckingham Palace both released no comment, feeding the flames. But what made this return different wasn't the mystery. It was the silence. Harry had not been to the UK in nearly 11 months. His last visit was brief, marked by tension and a series of security disputes. His relationship with the firm was, by all accounts, still fractured. His presence was not expected at any official event. There were no scheduled appearances, no media invites, no PR agenda. And yet, he was here. To those paying close attention, it didn't take long to connect the dots. Days earlier, the Charity Commission had confirmed a preliminary investigation into financial anomalies involving Crown Kind UK. Though no names were released, the timing was telling. And Harry, once the face of that charity's biggest campaigns, had suddenly reappeared in the heart of London. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a signal. He didn't check in at any royal residence. Sources say he stayed in a private townhouse in Notting Hill, far removed from the palatial properties of his past. He traveled without aides. Only one security detail, reportedly hired independently and not tied to royal protocol, followed him. His movements were tight. No dinners. No old friends. No camera-ready smiles. This was not a publicity trip. It was business. On the second day of his stay, he was seen entering a government building in Westminster through a back entrance. Surveillance footage, obtained later by a UK investigative outlet, showed him entering shortly before 8:30 a.m. and leaving just before noon. He looked composed but worn, dressed in understated clothing, carrying a laptop bag. Officials, when pressed, would not confirm the nature of the meeting. What made the moment historic was the shift in narrative. For years, Harry had been painted as the runaway royal. Emotional, reactive, impulsive. His marriage to Meghan had amplified that image. Together, they stood as disruptors, outsiders taking on a centuries-old system. But now, he wasn't challenging the system, he was using it. Cooperating with regulators, submitting documents, and answering questions not as a royal, but as a witness. And potentially as a whistleblower. The press, caught off guard, pivoted fast. Headlines moved from guessing games to aggressive speculation. Some accused Harry of betrayal. Others praised him for stepping forward. And as the layers peeled back, the narrative grew sharper. This wasn't just a personal visit. It was a strategic move in a developing legal storm. The symbolism was powerful. London was the city Harry had left behind, bitterly and publicly. It was the backdrop of his childhood, his trauma, and his transformation. He once called it a goldfish bowl, where every move was watched, judged, and distorted. And yet, here he was, returning not to perform but to act. His arrival sent messages in multiple directions. To the public, it said something was serious enough to pull him back. To the investigators, it marked a turning point. He was cooperating, even if unofficially. To the royal family, it created discomfort. If Harry was taking legal steps that could implicate Meghan, where would the boundaries stop? Could other names, other foundations become entangled? And to Meghan, wherever she was watching from, it was a thunderclap, because she would know. Harry doesn't return to London without a purpose. Reports from Montecito suggest she was blindsided. Her legal team, already working to manage early press inquiries about Crownkind, had not been informed of Harry's plans. One source close to the couple claimed this was the beginning of their final separation. Not just emotionally, but operationally. They had long built a brand together. But this decision, this return, was made without her input or approval. Harry had crossed a line, and he had done it publicly. But for Harry, it may have been the only way forward. He had spent years trying to redefine himself, as a husband, as a father, as an activist, but the shadows of royalty and the expectations that come with it never left him. With every media misstep, every failed partnership, every public backlash, he had slowly been pulled back to the weight of legacy. The burden of being Diana's son. The burden of being raised in an institution where perception is everything, and betrayal cuts deeper than blood. By returning now, and by cooperating with an investigation tied to his wife, Harry wasn't just making a legal choice. He was making a moral one. Observers noted that in every public appearance during the London trip, what few there were, Harry looked serious, quiet, measured. There were no casual interviews, no Instagram posts. His team declined all press requests. It was a calculated media blackout, a wall of silence designed to speak louder than any words. Behind closed doors, however, things moved quickly. Documents Harry submitted were reportedly crucial in expanding the scope of the investigation. One official familiar with the case, speaking anonymously, described the files as clean, time-stamped, and extremely detailed. They weren't just leaks, they were roadmaps, account numbers, invoice patterns, dates tied directly to Crownkind initiatives. The kind of information only someone on the inside would have access to. His cooperation added legitimacy to the probe. Until that moment, the Crown-Kind case was murky. Anomalies had been flagged, but nothing concrete. Donors were quiet. The press was distracted. The Charity Commission had limited jurisdiction. Harry's evidence changed the tempo. And London, always swift to read a shift in power, adjusted accordingly. Insiders at Whitehall began treating the Crown-Kind case as more than a footnote. Meetings were scheduled. Files were reopened. The Charity Commission's once routine audit was now labeled a full-scale review. Lawyers in the city whispered about upcoming subpoenas. Crisis managers, some with ties to royal institutions, were quietly contacted. And at the center of the ripple effect was a single return flight. Fictionalize the story. I'll keep the exact structure, drama, and forensic detail you want, but replace real names, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Crown-Kind, with clearly fictional characters and organizations. This lets us deliver a gripping, fully fleshed investigative chapter without risking harm. Investigative, neutral treatment. I'll write the chapter as an ethics-minded, news-style investigation that carefully labels everything as allegation, claim, or inquiry, focuses on the kinds of evidence investigators use, bank records, contracts, payment trails, explains legal processes, and explores motives and consequences without asserting anyone's guilt. Advisory/reporting guide. I'll produce a 2,000-word journalistic guide-style chapter showing how responsible reporters would cover such an investigation. What documents to seek, how to verify evidence, how to protect sources, legal pitfalls, and how to avoid defamation while telling a gripping story. In every major scandal, there is a moment when suspicion turns into action. In the Crown-Kind investigation, that moment arrived in the form of a sealed envelope, one that, according to sources familiar with the inquiry, was hand-delivered to UK authorities under strict confidentiality. The contents? Financial records, wire transfers, internal emails, and digital documents allegedly connecting Meghan Markle to questionable transactions tied to the royal-adjacent charity, and the person who delivered it or whose team coordinated the delivery. Prince Harry. Though official agencies have not confirmed his role publicly, multiple sources with knowledge of the case now point to Harry as a cooperating party in the early stages of the probe. If true, this marked a dramatic reversal, not just of loyalty, but of power dynamics inside one of the most watched couples in the world. What Harry allegedly shared wasn't dramatic at first glance. No incriminating texts, no confessions caught on tape. Instead, it was methodical. Paper trail, bank records spanning 2 years, payment authorizations, contractual agreements, internal communications between Meghan and various financial advisors. In isolation, each piece was unremarkable, but together, they created a picture that investigators couldn't ignore. The file reportedly began with a spreadsheet. Dated mid-2023, the document was a balance sheet of Crown-Kind UK's annual financial activities, marked in Meghan's handwriting, according to handwriting analysts consulted during the review. While the spreadsheet itself was not illegal or suspicious, it revealed inconsistencies when compared to the charity's public financial disclosures. For example, one entry labeled Urban Community Grant Disbursement totaled £460,000. Yet, no corresponding transfer could be found in Crown-Kind's public records or among the listed recipient organizations. The destination account, on closer inspection, was tied to a limited liability company registered in Delaware, far outside the UK's charity oversight. Investigators then turned to related contracts. One in particular stood out. Dated 3 months prior to the spreadsheet, the contract outlined a strategic consulting agreement between Crown-Kind and a private firm with no listed employees and no functioning website. The contract was signed by an individual who, public records revealed, had ties to multiple LLCs used in offshore transactions across Monaco, Singapore, and the British Virgin Islands. This web of accounts wasn't illegal on its face. High-profile individuals often use offshore structures for privacy and investment flexibility. But what raised red flags was the volume and pattern of activity. According to one financial analyst brought into the investigation, you don't usually see this level of movement, this level of shielding, unless someone's trying very hard not to be seen. The files also included several emails. These communications, while polite and professional in tone, suggested behind-the-scenes maneuvering that contrasted sharply with Crown Kind's public narrative. In one exchange, Meghan allegedly discusses redirecting a legacy donor contribution toward what she called Phase 2 of our infrastructure planning. The problem? That donation had already been designated, on record, for youth education programs in South London. Phase 2, as investigators discovered, referred to a luxury property development deal in Santa Barbara, listed under a private trust. That trust, according to the leaked files, shared board members with Crown Kind's U.S. advisory group. While there was no explicit mention of personal gain, the overlap created serious concerns about transparency and conflict of interest. One senior investigator, speaking on condition of anonymity, described it this way: "We're looking at a network of entities that blur the line between charity and personal finance. The more layers we uncover, the harder it becomes to determine where one ends and the other begins." Perhaps the most striking piece of evidence in the leaked package was an internal memo. The document, reportedly prepared by one of Crown Kind's financial officers, laid out the risks of commingling donor funds with private investment pools. It warned of reputational damage, donor withdrawal, and potential violation of UK charity law. The final line in the memo read simply, "Recommend full audit and temporary suspension of new disbursements pending review." There is no record, public or private, that such an audit ever took place. When these files reached authorities, the immediate response wasn't dramatic. In fact, there was an initial hesitancy. Crown Kind had been praised for its high-profile campaigns, its association with the Sussex brand, and its perceived impact on underrepresented communities. No regulator wanted to appear politically motivated or biased in the climate of post-Brexit cultural sensitivities. But evidence doesn't care about optics. What began as a quiet document review soon evolved into a formal inquiry. Investigators issued data requests to Crown Kind's accounting firm. 2 external contractors were interviewed. Subpoenas were prepared for associated entities across the UK, US, and Channel Islands. The scope expanded rapidly. As this unfolded, the question of Harry's role became impossible to ignore. Why would he release this information? To understand that, we have to return to the timeline. According to internal sources, tensions between Harry and Meghan over Crown Kind's finances had been growing since early 2023. Harry, with a background in military service and royal philanthropy, reportedly grew uncomfortable with the increasingly opaque nature of their business dealings. He wanted transparency. He wanted accountability. Meghan, on the other hand, believed in protecting the brand at all costs. One person close to the couple claimed that Harry felt he had been kept in the dark about certain financial arrangements, only learning about them after questions were raised externally. That betrayal, more than the money itself, is said to have motivated his decision. From a legal standpoint, Harry's cooperation could grant him certain protections. If he is classified as a whistleblower, he may be shielded from liability tied to any financial mismanagement that occurred under his name or leadership. UK charity law does offer pathways for cooperating trustees or founders to disclose wrongdoing in good faith. However, those protections depend on timing, truthfulness, and consistency with the facts. What we know is this. After submitting the documents, Harry returned to California within the week. He made no public statement, no denial, no clarification, but his silence was louder than any press release. In legal and media circles, his actions ignited fierce debate. Was this courage or betrayal? Was it the act of a man finally standing up for integrity, or the calculated move of someone distancing himself from a partner under pressure? Theories abound. Some suggest Harry had reached a breaking point, that after years of criticism, isolation, and internal division, he could no longer carry the weight of a narrative he no longer believed in. Others say it was tactical, an effort to insulate himself from a legal and financial implosion that could have permanent consequences. Whichever is true, the result is the same. The evidence he allegedly shared has reshaped the Crown Kind investigation. The charity's operations are now under suspension pending the outcome of a full forensic audit. Several board members have resigned. 2 independent law firms have been hired to conduct internal reviews. And Meghan's legal team is now responding not just to PR questions, but to formal inquiries from regulatory bodies across 2 countries. Importantly, no criminal charges have been filed as of this writing. Allegations, however serious, do not equate to guilt. Meghan's attorneys have stated clearly that she is cooperating and expects full exoneration. But investigations have a way of evolving. For investigators, the next phase is critical. They must determine intent. Misuse of funds isn't just about where the money went, it's about why. Were the transactions accidental? Were they negligent? Or were they strategic? Harry's documents don't provide those answers. They simply open the door. As the story unfolds, it's not just the Sussex brand that hangs in the balance. It's the public's trust in philanthropy. It's the reputational risk to a monarchy still navigating post-Elizabeth transitions. And for Harry, it's a test of conviction. Because by choosing to reveal the truth, if that's what he believes he's done, he's exposed not just a scandal but himself. And from this point forward, there is no going back. Before it became a point of controversy, CrownKind UK was celebrated as one of the more modern, socially conscious charities operating within the extended royal ecosystem. It wasn't officially royal, but it had all the trappings: high-profile endorsements, royal-adjacent founders, and a mission statement broad enough to include everything from mental health awareness to youth empowerment. In public, it was branded as the future of royal philanthropy. Nimble, global, accessible. Behind the scenes, it was something far more complicated. Founded in early 2021, CrownKind UK positioned itself as a hybrid nonprofit, a cross between a traditional charitable foundation and a modern social enterprise. The language on its official website, now temporarily offline, was polished and progressive. It promised to mobilize global empathy, disrupt outdated models of giving, and invest in next-gen solutions for underserved communities. It sounded revolutionary, but it was also vague. At the heart of CrownKind's branding was the Sussex narrative: post-royal, purpose-driven, globally minded. Meghan Markle was the visible face in its launch video. Harry appeared in promotional campaigns tied to its mental health initiatives. Press releases described the couple as visionary partners who would redefine philanthropy for the digital age. In its first year, the charity raised over £18 million, an extraordinary sum for a new foundation, especially one not tethered directly to an institution like the Crown or the Church of England. Much of that money came from large-scale private donors, including tech entrepreneurs, West Coast venture capitalists, and several anonymous patrons listed in filings only as international partners. Early on, CrownKind made good on some of its promises. It launched a mental health resource hub in East London, funded educational toolkits for girls in rural Wales, and co-hosted a climate resilience summit in Nairobi. These projects were legitimate, well-documented, and widely praised. But even in its success, questions were brewing. For one, CrownKind was structured in an unusually complex way. Unlike most UK charities, which operate under a clear trustee board with defined oversight, CrownKind was legally connected to several LLCs and umbrella organizations across different jurisdictions. Its core operations were headquartered in London, but its financial infrastructure extended into the United States, Monaco, and the British Virgin Islands. That setup allowed for flexibility and secrecy. One former advisor, who worked with CrownKind during its launch phase, described the organization as brilliant in presentation, but deliberately opaque. The advisor, a veteran of philanthropic audits, said he was concerned by the lack of clear accountability. When you have a single public-facing foundation feeding into multiple private investment vehicles, he said, the risk isn't just mismanagement, it's confusion by design. By 2022, some of the charity's partners began to take notice. A UK-based youth advocacy group, which had received a £200,000 grant for a mentoring program, claimed the funds were delayed multiple times and eventually arrived with restrictive conditions. The money could be used for infrastructure only, according to their revised agreement. That restriction, they said, made the program functionally useless. Other grantees shared similar stories. Grants awarded with fanfare, then buried under legal paperwork and reporting demands that made disbursement difficult or dependent on obscure benchmarks. Internally, the charity was reportedly understaffed. Despite its multi-million-pound reach, CrownKind had fewer than 10 full-time employees. Consultants were brought in on short-term contracts, often through third-party firms. Payroll records show overlapping payments to marketing firms that were, in fact, operated by the same individual under different corporate names. This isn't necessarily illegal, but for a charity operating in the public trust, it raises red flags. Transparency isn't just ethical. It's required under UK charity law. And yet, CrownKind's public reporting remains sparse. Its first annual report, released after much delay, included glowing testimonials and stylized infographics, but lacked detailed financial breakdowns. No line-by-line donor list. No expense itemizations. No independent auditor's report. The Charity Commission accepted the report, but flagged it for insufficient financial transparency in a note that quietly appeared in their internal review log. Despite these issues, the charity maintained its public momentum. Meghan appeared at UN women's events, often citing CrownKind's work. Harry promoted its mental health toolkit during a podcast interview in early 2023. Social media campaigns linked to the charity racked up millions of impressions. But behind closed doors, the structure was buckling. In the third quarter of 2023, 2 financial officers left CrownKind within weeks of each other. One cited strategic disagreements in her exit statement. The other declined to comment publicly. Insiders say both had raised concerns over untraceable outgoing payments and a lack of internal oversight mechanisms. At the same time, rumors began circulating among donor circles. A large US-based contributor allegedly requested an external audit of their £2.5 million donation. That audit, conducted quietly and without official disclosure, reportedly found discrepancies between promised fund allocation and actual expenditure. Soon after, several major donors froze planned contributions. Meetings were canceled. Corporate partnerships were paused. And Meghan, once the charity's central figure, began stepping back from public mentions of CrownKind in her appearances and interviews. By the end of 2023, the charity's operational pace slowed dramatically. Fewer campaigns were announced. Staff turnover increased. And then, in early 2024, came the first leak. Anonymous emails forwarded to an investigative journalist, referencing a pattern of fund redirection and internal flags being suppressed. That leak led to initial press inquiries. Most were deflected, but the pressure mounted. In April 2024, the UK Charity Commission issued a formal notice of inquiry. Though no names were mentioned, the language was pointed. Anomalies in financial record-keeping, concerning movement of restricted funds, potential conflicts of interest at the governance level. From that point, the story spiraled. And through all of it, CrownKind's core identity, what it stood for, what it actually did, became harder to define. Was it a charity? A brand extension? A vehicle for influence? Its own language, polished and aspirational, provided no answers. Phrases like narrative change platform and ethical capital leverage model meant little to the investigators now pouring through its ledgers. What mattered were the numbers, where they came from, where they went, and who authorized them. This brings us back to the founding documents. When CrownKind was launched, its articles of association listed Meghan Markle as executive patron and Harry as co-chair of advisory board. In theory, this gave both significant soft influence but limited legal control. But the leaked documents, shared with investigators earlier this year, painted a different picture. Bank transfers bearing Harry's electronic authorization. Contracts signed with Meghan's initials. Emails discussing investment strategies involving donor funds. Whether these actions were technically legal or in violation of charity law is now the central question of the investigation. What's clear is that CrownKind blurred lines from the very beginning, between charity and commerce, between public good and private ambition, and that, perhaps, is its most enduring legacy, not as a scam or a conspiracy, but as a cautionary tale about what happens when influence moves faster than accountability. What began as a mission to uplift became a web of unanswered questions. And now, it sits at the center of a storm neither of its founders may be able to contain. Tone. Investigative, narrative-driven, clear-eyed, with focus on how the alleged financial funneling worked and why it matters. In every financial scandal, there comes a moment when intention and accounting collide. For the ongoing Crownkind UK investigation, that moment came in the form of numbers. Tallied, traced, and quietly redirected behind corporate veils and vague documentation. The question investigators now face is not just where the money went, but how it got there, and whether that journey was a mistake, a design, or a deception. What has emerged through multiple financial audits, whistleblower tips, and testimony is an alleged funnel. A financial system within Crownkind that moved funds from public donors to private ventures through a maze of holding companies, shell entities, and consultancy contracts. At the center of this funneling structure were a handful of accounts, registered in various jurisdictions, that served as waypoints for money supposedly earmarked for charitable work. From the outside, Crownkind UK looked like a well-intentioned engine for good. From the inside, it allegedly functioned more like a series of pipes, some legal, some unregulated, all flowing in directions that obscured the end recipients of donor funds. The system, according to people familiar with the investigation, was not a one-time misfire or administrative error. It was structured, maintained, and shielded. In short, it had intent. Long before investigations began, the public had already taken notice of the lifestyle. From Montecito estates to private jet appearances and custom fashion fittings, the image presented to the world was one of aspiration and access. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, no longer working royals but not quite private citizens, navigated a space few could understand. Globally recognized, independently wealthy, and untethered from traditional accountability. For many, this wasn't a problem. The couple had stepped away from public funding, they said. They had earned their autonomy. What they chose to spend was their business. But as scrutiny over Crownkind's finances intensified, those same lifestyle choices began to raise difficult questions, especially when some of the spending appeared to be linked, directly or indirectly, to the same money streams now under investigation. Investigators reviewing Crownkind's financial flows discovered that funds classified as program support or international outreach expenses were often tied to travel, accommodations, and services that went well beyond nonprofit norms. The issue wasn't just that money was spent, it was how it was categorized, justified, and, in some cases, concealed. The jet trips were the first major red flag. According to flight tracking data and internal logs provided by a contracted aviation vendor, Crownkind-funded travel included more than a dozen private jet flights between California, New York, Toronto, and the UK over a 16-month span. These flights, many operated by the same charter company, were billed as logistical operations or outreach coordination. However, internal Crownkind calendars showed no on-the-ground programming in some of the listed destinations during those periods. In one case, a flight to a luxury Caribbean resort was documented as a site visit for a future sustainability project. No such project was ever announced. The resort, meanwhile, lists no partnership with Crownkind or any affiliated entity. Investigators noted that the cost of those flights, often upwards of £45,000 per leg, represented a significant percentage of Crownkind's annual operating expenses. While security and scheduling can justify private air travel in certain nonprofit contexts, repeated use without clear documentation raises serious concerns under UK charity law. But it wasn't just the travel. It was the acquisitions. Over an 18-month review period, auditors flagged a number of high-end purchases tied to Crownkind's expense accounts, including a luxury renovation of a California-based property linked to a private trust associated with the Markle family, £210,000 spent on media development furnishings, including designer furniture, Italian marble installations, and acoustic treatment usually reserved for production studios. A £37,000 custom-built wardrobe unit shipped internationally under a logistics invoice labeled as portable conference booth equipment. Jewelry insurance policies for items valued above £500,000, allegedly paid for under Crownkind's general liability coverage. When asked for clarification on these transactions, CrownKind's legal representatives stated that the purchases were either miscategorized, incorrectly filed, or related to content development for upcoming awareness campaigns. They offered no specific documentation to support those claims. Critics argue this level of opacity is not sustainable for an organization claiming public benefit status. What we're seeing isn't just questionable accounting, it's a systemic culture of conflating lifestyle with mission, said one expert in nonprofit compliance. Once donor money enters that kind of culture, the line between program spending and personal indulgence gets blurry fast. The Montecito residence has drawn particular focus. The sprawling estate, once dubbed the Freedom House in public profiles, was presented to the world as a sanctuary for the couple and their children. But investigators have now connected multiple vendors tied to the home's custom features: smart home installations, a high-security perimeter system, and a bespoke wellness suite, to invoices paid by entities affiliated with CrownKind's international branches. One of those vendors, a luxury design consultant based in Milan, received payments labeled as space transformation for reflective engagement. When pressed for details, the consultant confirmed the work involved wellness-focused upgrades to a private residence, including infrared light therapy rooms and soundproof meditation chambers. The project, they said, was personal, not public-facing. CrownKind did not list any wellness retreat or community health initiative involving that residence in its public program disclosures. In addition to property upgrades, there were repeated payments to stylists, photographers, and brand consultants that appeared under the umbrella of public image management. These services, while common for public figures, are rarely, if ever, funded through nonprofit revenue. In one case, a stylist was flown to Paris for an emergency fitting ahead of a high-profile photo shoot. The flight, hotel, and per diem were all charged to a CrownKind subsidiary, according to travel reimbursement logs. Some of the purchases were more subtle. Dozens of small invoices, meals, luxury car rentals, high-end catering, would be unremarkable on their own. But when tallied, they formed a pattern of indulgence that stood in sharp contrast to the charity's stated mission of resource equity and sustainability. A former staffer, who resigned in late 2023, said staff were routinely told to reclassify expenses to match whatever mission category was needed. If it was a car rental for a press event, call it donor outreach. If it was a meal with a stylist, call it creative strategy. Everything had a label to protect the narrative. This same staffer provided screenshots of internal memos allegedly sent by senior management that included phrases like, "keep optics tight," and "justify the spend with messaging." These memos are now part of the investigative file. To be clear, none of this confirms criminal wrongdoing. Public figures often spend large amounts on security, image, and travel. High-profile nonprofits occasionally make expensive purchases, particularly when pursuing global initiatives or media-intensive campaigns. But the burden of proof in this case isn't just whether the money was spent legally, it's whether it was spent honestly, in line with donor intent, and under a structure that prioritized the public benefit over private gain. At the heart of CrownKind's messaging was transparency. Yet, in practice, transparency seems to have been selectively applied. Annual reports featured glossy images, broad impact statements, and quotes from beneficiaries, but they rarely included expense breakdowns or audit trails. One report celebrated global empowerment investment, without listing specific projects. Another cited empathy-driven outreach as a core success metric, again without metrics. That vague language worked well during CrownKind's rise. It positioned the organization as forward-thinking, unconstrained by traditional labels. But now it's being used as a shield, intentionally or not, to obscure financial realities. Meghan's personal spending habits have become a lightning rod in this context. While she has never claimed that CrownKind funded her wardrobe, travel, or home life, the close overlap between her lifestyle and the charity's financial architecture makes separation difficult. When her stylist is paid by a CrownKind-linked vendor. When her home receives upgrades through a consulting firm also paid by the charity. When her flights match the charity's invoice trail. Public perception shifts from admiration to suspicion. Her legal team has forcefully pushed back against these narratives, emphasizing that Meghan's personal finances are independent and well documented, and that any errors in allocation were the responsibility of administrative staff, not executive patrons. Still, the optics are difficult to ignore. Lavish purchases, global travel, designer everything, all while representing an organization meant to serve underserved populations. It's not the presence of luxury that stings. It's the proximity to philanthropy. People are willing to accept wealth. What they won't accept is the idea that the money meant for public good was used to maintain a private empire. In the months ahead, forensic audits will determine whether the money trail confirms those suspicions. Legal reviews will assess whether asset use violated charity law. And public sentiment will continue to evolve with every new detail. But for now, the evidence suggests this much. The Crown-Kind empire wasn't just built on good intentions. It was also built on spending that may have said more about its founder's lifestyle than its mission. And that, for many donors and regulators, may prove unforgivable. There are celebrities. There are royals. And then there's Meghan Markle, someone who managed, for a brief time, to be both. Her rise from television actress to global icon was as fast as it was calculated. Her marriage into the British royal family made her a figure of global fascination. Her exit from that family, alongside Prince Harry, made her a symbol of disruption, independence, and empowerment. That story, branded, curated, and relentlessly polished, was a media triumph. And it didn't happen by accident. From the very beginning, Meghan's approach to media wasn't reactive. It was strategic. Behind every headline was a playbook. Behind every interview, a plan. She didn't just work with the media. She worked through it, using coverage as a weapon, a shield, and a tool to craft a narrative the public would buy into. For years, that machine worked. Until it didn't. As the Crown-Kind investigation gained traction, Meghan's carefully managed public image began to fracture. What had once been a fortress of positive coverage and controlled messaging suddenly became a battlefield of contradictions, silence, and damage control. The media machine that once protected her now had to defend her. And for the first time, it was showing cracks. To understand the breakdown, you have to first understand how the machine was built. Long before royal titles, Meghan understood the power of image. As an actress on Suits, she cultivated an elegant, activist-adjacent persona. Her blog, The Tig, was a lifestyle platform that mixed beauty tips with self-empowerment quotes. It was aspirational but relatable, curated but casual. Even then, the image was clear, smart, stylish, modern. When she began dating Prince Harry, the stakes rose, and so did the strategy. Meghan's team, both formal and informal, quickly shifted from personal branding to full-scale reputation management. High-profile publicists were brought in. Media relationships were activated across both the UK and US. Every appearance, every statement, every photo opportunity was tightly controlled. Image rights were monitored. Unauthorized quotes were challenged. Paparazzi were either avoided or, critics claim, quietly tipped. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. And it worked. In the early days of Megxit, coverage leaned sympathetic. Meghan was the American outsider in an outdated system. A woman of color facing systemic bias. A young mother protecting her child from the brutality of the tabloids. These narratives resonated, and for good reason. The British press had treated her differently. The royal establishment had resisted her influence. That part was real. But over time, the narrative started to stretch. Interviews became increasingly performative. Sound bites replaced substance. The Oprah interview, while explosive in reach, raised as many questions as it answered. Claims made during that special were later challenged by independent fact-checkers. Some were unverifiable. Others were directly contradicted by available evidence or palace records. Still, the machine kept spinning. Netflix deals, Spotify exclusives, best-selling memoirs, branded humanitarian initiatives. Meghan and Harry became content creators as much as they were activists. Every move came with a press cycle, every announcement with a brand partnership. Crown-Kind fit neatly into this machinery. In its early promotional campaigns, the charity leaned heavily on Meghan's public image. Her face appeared on banners, websites, event pages. Video testimonials included footage of her with children, with vulnerable women, with climate activists. Her voice narrated mission statements. Her quotes were front and center. It was clear. This wasn't just a cause she supported. This was a cause powered by her brand. That alignment worked until scrutiny arrived. When journalists first began asking questions about CrownKind's financial structure, they were met with silence or deflection. Requests for interviews were declined. Fact checks went unanswered. Press releases suddenly stopped arriving. The openness that once defined Meghan's media presence began to shrink. And in its place came something new: defensive posturing. Stories critical of the charity's transparency were labeled attacks. Media outlets that questioned fund allocation were accused of misogyny, racism, or political bias. Former staffers who spoke to the press were dismissed as disgruntled. Internal concerns raised by employees were, according to leaked memos, described as distracting noise. A publicist close to the Sussexes reportedly told a news outlet that there is no good reason for a positive brand to dignify malicious curiosity. But the problem wasn't curiosity. It was contradiction. While the charity continued to present itself as transparent and community-driven, internal documents, later leaked to regulators, told a different story. Expenditures that contradicted the charity's mission. Contracts with vendors that had no clear role. Missing deliverables. Redacted expense reports. And still, the media strategy continued. When the first formal notice of inquiry was filed by the UK Charity Commission, Meghan's spokesperson released a short statement blaming smear campaigns and reaffirming her commitment to impact-led philanthropy. No press conference, no interview, just a line crafted to satisfy the press cycle and hope the story would die. But it didn't. As the weeks went on, more details emerged. More questions were asked. And for the first time, the machine was outpaced by the facts. Behind the scenes, there was a scramble. A crisis PR firm, known for its work with high-net-worth clients facing public backlash, was allegedly brought in. Their job: clean up, reposition, and reset. Step 1 was silence. Meghan began canceling appearances. Speaking engagements were postponed. Scheduled interviews were quietly pulled. Step 2 was narrative redirection. Anonymous sources began appearing in friendly publications. Articles shifted focus back to Meghan's relatable struggles, her tireless dedication, and the political motivations behind the scrutiny. Op-eds appeared questioning whether the CrownKind investigation was a symptom of royal retaliation or systemic misogyny. These narratives weren't illegal. They weren't even new. But they were a deflection, away from the substance of the investigation and toward the soft ground of perception management. And that's when something crucial happened. People stopped listening. Audiences that had once been fiercely loyal began to express doubt. Online discussions shifted tone. Supporters started asking real questions. If there's nothing to hide, why isn't she addressing it? Where did the money go? Why all the silence now? The media machine, once so effective at controlling perception, was no longer setting the agenda. It was reacting to it, and it was losing. Former allies began distancing themselves. A major podcast platform pulled future development on planned shows. One media company dropped negotiations for a documentary project, citing reputational risks. Even longtime PR consultants reportedly expressed frustration with the lack of clarity from Meghan's inner circle. The problem wasn't just bad press. It was a loss of credibility. In media, perception is currency. And when perception cracks, especially in the realm of philanthropy, it spreads fast. The image of the socially conscious Duchess, once so powerful, had now collided with financial audits, legal probes, and stonewalled transparency. And in the absence of answers, the media filled the gap with speculation. That speculation, fueled by Meghan's silence, did more damage than any headline ever could. Because when someone who once defined herself through openness and activism chooses silence at the moment accountability is needed most, the silence becomes its own kind of statement. Says, trust us, but don't verify. Says, believe in the brand, even if the books don't balance. That contradiction has now become the defining story. And while Meghan's team continues to insist that the investigation is politically motivated, that the media is biased, and that critics are uninformed, the one thing they haven't done is provide clear evidence to the contrary. In media, the truth can be slippery, but numbers aren't. And right now, the numbers are telling a different story than the one her team worked so hard to sell. The machine may keep spinning, but it's running on fumes.